You're floating on the surface of the open ocean, alone with nothing beneath you but dark water and whatever happens to be swimming through it. Somewhere down there is an animal capable of flipping a great white shark, taking down a blue whale, and, more recently, sinking boats off the coast of Europe. And in the entire recorded history of encounters between this animal and humans in the wild, it has never once killed a person. Here's the question nobody really asks. Why would a hunter this capable actively cross us off its menu? Let's start with what people usually get wrong before we even get to the good part. Because for most of recorded history, humans didn't see this animal as restrained at all. They saw it as a monster. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote about it as an enormous mass of savage teeth, a creature seemingly built for nothing but violence. That fear followed the species for nearly 2,000 years, and it's baked directly into the name most people still use for it today. Early Basque and Spanish whalers, watching pods of these animals surround and methodically take down massive baleen whales, many times their size, called them balena asesina, meaning whale killer. It was a description of prey, not personality. But when that phrase crossed into English, the word order quietly flipped. Whale killer became killer whale, and a footnote about diet somehow became the entire identity of the species. Here's the thing nobody tells you. It isn't even a whale. Taxonomically, the orca is the largest member of the oceanic dolphin family, a branch within the wider group of toothed whales. Its scientific name, Orcinus orca, borrows from Orcus, the Roman god of the underworld, and biologically speaking, it earns that title. A mature male can stretch close to 10 meters and weigh up to 10 metric tons, roughly the mass of a city bus. Its dorsal fin, built entirely of collagen with no supporting bone inside it, can stand nearly 2 meters tall, functioning simultaneously as a rudder for cutting sharp turns at speed, and as a radiator, shedding excess body heat generated during a high-speed chase. Its most feared weapon sits in its jaw. Roughly 40 conical teeth, each around 10 centimeters long, curve inward and interlock like the teeth of a bear trap, designed less for slicing and more for gripping and holding. Its bite force is powerful enough to crush the densest bone in its prey's body, and with no natural predator of its own anywhere in the ocean, it sits alone at the very top of the marine food chain. And that black and white pattern people assume would make it painfully obvious in open water? It's actually a precision camouflage system called countershading. Seen from above by a prey animal looking down, the orca's dark back dissolves into the deep, shadowed ocean floor beneath it. Seen from below by a prey animal looking up, its stark white underside disappears into the shimmering, sunlit surface. The sharp white patches along its flanks even work to break up its outline entirely, scrambling any attempt to judge its real size, shape, or direction of travel until it's already far too close to matter. Nature does occasionally throw in an exception just to keep things interesting. In 2012, researchers off Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula documented a mature male nicknamed Iceberg, carrying a rare genetic mutation that left him almost entirely white. Now here's where it gets interesting, because that body isn't built for one ocean. It's built for all of them, which makes the orca one of the most widely distributed mammals on the entire planet, rivaled only by humans in the sheer range of environments it occupies. Orcas hunt in freezing Antarctic waters thick with pack ice, cruise through tropical coral reefs off Hawaii, and patrol water near 30 degrees Celsius off the Arabian Peninsula. That range is powered by blubber up to 10 centimeters thick and a circulatory system capable of dynamically redirecting blood flow, either trapping heat deep in the body's core or venting it out through the skin, essentially on demand. Running that system takes fuel, and a lot of it. A mature orca needs roughly 135 kilograms of meat a day, an appetite that has pushed the species into becoming the single most versatile hunter in the ocean, with a documented prey list stretching past 140 different species, from small schooling fish to the largest animals that have ever lived. Its most infamous kill is genuinely unsettling once you understand the method behind it. For years, marine biologists were baffled by great white shark carcasses washing ashore in South Africa, each one intact except for a single precise wound, the liver, surgically removed. The culprits turned out to be orcas, exploiting a very specific biological flaw. Flip a shark upside down, and it enters a state called tonic immobility, a kind of neural paralysis that eventually drowns it because it can no longer force water across its gills. Orcas learned to ram a shark's flank at speed, flip it over, and extract the liver, the single most calorie-dense, fat-rich organ available anywhere in the ocean. The fear this generates runs deep. In parts of Australia, great white sharks have been documented abandoning entire territories for months at a time the moment orca activity is detected nearby, choosing to leave rich hunting grounds entirely rather than risk an encounter. And in 2019 and again in 2021, Off Bremer Bay in Western Australia, scientists filmed something that had only ever existed as theory before: coordinated pods of orcas systematically taking down adult blue whales, the single largest animals to ever exist on Earth. Individuals took turns pinning the blowhole shut to cut off breathing while others targeted the tongue, working with a level of coordination that looked less like animal instinct and more like a trained military unit executing a plan. That footage confirmed something researchers had long suspected, but never directly observed. There is no functional upper size limit on what an orca pod is willing or able to hunt. Here's the thing nobody tells you about how they pull any of this off, though. It isn't raw strength alone. It's technique, taught deliberately and refined across generations, adapted differently in nearly every population around the world. In Antarctica, pods create synchronized waves by swimming together in tight formation to wash seals directly off floating ice, a maneuver that requires precise timing between multiple individuals. On Argentina's Valdez Peninsula, orcas intentionally beach themselves at full speed to snatch sea lion pups off the sand, then use raw muscular force to drag themselves back into the surf before they strand. A maneuver so precise and dangerous that mothers spend years teaching it to their calves because one miscalculated angle on the beach's slope can leave a young orca stranded and dying in the sun. Off the coast of Norway, entirely different pods have developed something called carousel feeding, working together to herd massive schools of herring into a tight, panicked ball near the surface, then slapping the ball with their tails to stun dozens of fish at once. And off Alaska, in the Bering Sea, some pods have learned to identify the specific acoustic signature of a fishing boat's hydraulic winch from kilometers away, arriving in perfect timing to strip an entire commercial catch of sablefish or halibut straight off the line before it ever clears the water, essentially reading human industrial machinery as a dinner bell. That's not instinct. That's learning, region by region, family by family, and learning at that level requires genuine cognitive horsepower behind it. The orca brain is roughly 4 times the size of a human brain, with unusually complex, deeply folded structures in the regions tied to emotional processing. When researchers performed MRI scans on orca brains, they found dense networks of spindle neurons, the same specialized high-speed neural cells linked in humans to empathy, intuition, and social awareness. Orcas are also one of the vanishingly small handful of species, alongside great apes, elephants, and a few other cetaceans that pass the mirror self-recognition test, widely considered one of the clearest available benchmarks for genuine self-awareness. Every calf learns a unique acoustic signature within its first weeks of life, functioning essentially as a name, a sound broadcast across the ocean for the rest of its life, announcing exactly who it is and which family it belongs to. Now here's where it gets interesting again, because that level of intelligence didn't just produce better hunting, it produced something closer to actual culture. In the Pacific Northwest, resident orca pods eat almost exclusively salmon, while transient pods hunt marine mammals almost exclusively instead. They share the exact same waters, sometimes within sight of each other, and yet they don't interact, don't interbreed, and communicate using dialects so distinct that a resident pod's calls are essentially unintelligible to a transient pod, the acoustic equivalent of 2 people speaking entirely different languages. None of that difference is genetic. It's taught, passed down deliberately from mother to calf across generations, which is close to a working definition of culture in any species, including our own. Researchers have documented other behaviors that look a lot like simple recreation too, something called kelping, where orcas drape long strands of kelp over their bodies and rub it against their fins, apparently for no reason beyond the sensation itself. Underneath all of that culture sits a strict, remarkably stable, social structure built entirely around matriarchy. Pods, particularly resident populations, are led by the oldest female, and offspring of both sexes typically remain with their mothers for their entire lives, never forming their own separate pod. Embedded inside that structure is one of evolutionary biology's stranger long-running puzzles: menopause. Almost no species on Earth experiences it. Orcas, humans, and a small handful of other toothed whales are essentially the entire list. Under a strict reading of natural selection, an individual that can no longer reproduce should theoretically fade in evolutionary relevance. Instead, female orcas who stop reproducing around age 40 often go on living for another 3 to 4 decades. Specifically, researchers argue, to lead. This is called the grandmother hypothesis, and the reasoning behind it is fairly elegant. By stepping back from reproduction, older females stop competing with their own daughters for limited food resources and instead become something closer to a living archive for the entire pod, carrying decades of memory about salmon migration timing, safe travel routes, and where to find food during genuinely hard years. The legendary matriarch known as Granny designated J2, is estimated to have lived nearly 80 years, meaning she spent roughly half her life purely guiding her descendants rather than raising her own calves. Studies comparing pods with and without an elder grandmother present have found measurably higher survival rates during severe, food-scarce years in the pods she led. And that emotional depth, the same depth built on all that spindle neuron wiring, showed itself in the most publicly devastating way in the summer of 2018. A southern resident female named Tahlequah, designated J35, gave birth to a calf that survived only 30 minutes. Rather than let the body sink, Tahlequah carried it balanced on her forehead and began to swim. Every time the small body slipped beneath the surface, she dove down to retrieve it and push it back up. She refused to eat. She ignored her own mounting exhaustion. This continued for 17 consecutive days and nights, across roughly 1,000 miles of open water, with other pod members swimming close beside her the entire time, taking turns supporting the calf's weight whenever Tahlequah grew too tired to continue alone. Researchers and marine biologists watching the event unfold described it, without much hesitation, as grief, a word scientists are usually cautious about applying outside our own species. So here's the actual question this all builds toward. An animal this intelligent, this socially complex, this physically capable of ending a blue whale in open water has never once killed a human being in the wild. Not one confirmed case, anywhere, across the entire recorded history of human contact with wild orcas. Why? Start by ruling out the obvious, tempting wrong answer, because it's easy to assume orcas simply avoid us the same way sharks sometimes accidentally target us. Great white sharks bite humans largely because a paddling surfer's silhouette, seen from below against a bright surface, can genuinely resemble a seal, and sharks hunt primarily by sight in exactly those conditions. Orcas don't share that vulnerability because they don't rely on sight as their primary sense at all. They hunt using echolocation, rapid clicks, generated in a fatty organ called the melon, sent out into the water, and read on return through their jawbone and inner ear. Those returning sound waves don't just outline a rough shape the way vision does. They effectively see through it, returning detailed information about bone density, internal lung structure, and, critically, the thickness of the fat layer just beneath the skin. A seal is built almost entirely around a thick layer of blubber, dense and energy-rich. A human, by comparison, reads on an orca's sonar as something close to biologically wrong for the category of prey. Thin fat layer, unfamiliar bone density, an entirely different internal structure. It isn't that the orca glances at us and feels restraint. It's that its own sensory system is actively telling it, in real time, with far more detail than a shark's eyes ever could, that we simply don't match anything on its list of things worth pursuing. But even a sensory system this advanced has a blind spot. Churning surf, full of countless tiny air bubbles, scrambles sonar returns almost completely, creating a kind of temporary sensory fog, which is exactly what appears to have happened in one of the only documented bite incidents on record, off the coast of California in 1972. A surfer was paddling through turbulent whitewash when an orca, its echolocation briefly blinded by the bubbles and forced to rely on rougher visual cues alone, spotted a dark silhouette on the surface and reacted on pure predatory instinct. It surged forward and clamped down on the man's leg, a bite force easily capable of crushing whalebone fully engaged. And then, within a moment, it let go entirely and swam away. Researchers studying the incident point to the same explanation every time. The instant its jaws registered an unfamiliar bone structure that didn't match its expectations, the sensory error corrected itself, and the attack was aborted mid-bite. Restraint, functioning in real time, even after the animal's most powerful instinct had already been triggered by mistake. Which brings us to the strange, headline-grabbing case currently unfolding off the coast of Europe. Since the summer of 2020, a small population of orcas around the Iberian Peninsula, made up mostly of juveniles, has been ramming and snapping the rudders clean off sailboats. To date, there are more than 670 documented incidents. Several boats sunk outright, hulls breached, yachts lost entirely. Media coverage jumped almost immediately to language like revenge or an uprising, often centered on a single matriarch nicknamed White Gladys, theorized by some to have experienced a traumatic collision with a boat that triggered the behavior. But behavioral researchers studying the pattern point to one detail that gets buried under the drama. When a boat takes on water and panicked people go overboard, the orcas leave, every time. They do not approach the swimmers. Their target, consistently, specifically, is the rudder and nothing else. Researchers now lean toward a very different explanation than revenge, something closer to a cultural fad, not unlike a trend spreading rapidly among human teenagers. Ramming a moving rudder may generate a specific, interesting hydrodynamic sensation, or simply be a novel, physically engaging activity that spread through observation from one juvenile to another. Destructive to the boats, certainly. But even mid-behavior, mid-collision, With humans literally falling into the water beside them, the species-wide rule appears to hold: do not touch the person. That restraint has a breaking point, though, and it isn't found anywhere in the wild. It's found in captivity. An animal built to travel dozens of miles a day alongside a tightly bonded family unit, when instead confined to a concrete tank only a few body lengths across, can develop something researchers describe as zoochosis. A genuine, observable psychological breakdown brought on by captivity itself. The mechanism starts with the very sense that makes orcas so extraordinary in the wild. Echolocation clicks, instead of traveling freely through open ocean, bounce painfully off smooth concrete walls and return amplified and distorted again and again in an enclosed space with no escape. Researchers have compared it to being locked in a small closet and forced to listen to your own voice scream back at you continuously for years. It gets worse from there. In the wild, distinct pods maintain distinct cultures and entirely separate dialects. Marine parks historically captured individuals from completely different oceans and different family lines and placed them together in the same enclosure regardless, forcing animals that share no common language and no shared social structure into permanent, inescapable close quarters. The result, documented repeatedly, is real physical violence. The majority of captive orcas carry visible raking scars from the teeth of their tank mates. Frustration manifests physically too. Captive orcas are frequently observed grinding their teeth against steel gates and concrete ledges for hours, wearing the teeth down to the pulp, requiring veterinarians to drill out the exposed nerve regularly, historically often without anesthesia. And nearly every mature captive male develops a fully collapsed dorsal fin, a condition almost never seen in wild populations, caused simply by the absence of the water pressure and swimming range that keeps that unsupported collagen structure upright in the open ocean. The clearest, darkest illustration of what this can produce is the story of Tilikum, a massive male orca captured off the coast of Iceland in 1983 at just 2 years old. For years, Tilikum was confined overnight in a cramped, dark module barely 6 meters across, housed alongside aggressive tank mates, locked in for over 14 hours at a stretch specifically to prevent the animals from injuring each other further. Over more than 3 decades in captivity, Tilikum was directly involved in the deaths of 3 people. Researchers and former trainers who studied his case consistently describe these incidents not as predation, not as an animal simply being what it evolved to be, but as the outcome of prolonged, severe psychological deterioration in an animal never designed to live the way it was made to live. Wild orcas, meanwhile, are facing a different, quieter kind of threat, one with no single dramatic incident attached to it. The engine and propeller noise from modern cargo shipping is jamming echolocation across huge stretches of ocean, making it harder for pods to coordinate hunts, communicate over distance, or even track their own calves reliably. Legacy industrial chemicals, PCBs banned decades ago in most of the world, still accumulate in orca blubber at some of the highest concentrations recorded in any animal on the planet, driving immune suppression and elevated miscarriage rates in some populations. And collapsing salmon runs, worsened by climate change and decades of dam construction, are pushing fish specialist populations like the southern residents toward a genuinely brutal choice: abandon thousands of years of dietary and cultural tradition or starve. Long before any laboratory documented any of this, indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest already understood exactly what these animals were. The Lummi Nation has a name for them: Quail-hol-Mishen, which translates roughly to "our relatives under the waves." Not a monster from Pliny's writing, not a name born from a mistranslated whaling term, but a relative understood and respected as such for generations before modern marine biology ever caught up. So picture that scene again. You're floating in open water and something passes beneath you that could end your life in less time than it takes you to notice it happened. It doesn't. It reads you correctly in precise biological detail as something it has no interest in, and it simply moves on, back toward its family, its dialect, its decades of accumulated memory, and whatever the ocean has planned for it next. Nobody taught it mercy. Nothing forced that restraint into existence. It emerged apparently from an animal smart enough to know exactly what you are, and so far disciplined enough to leave you alone anyway.